Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through Dao De Jing. And today we are looking at number 16. So the format is everybody who wants reads their own translation, or the translation that they like. And then once everybody has read the translation, we will open it up for discussion. It will take as long as we need on number 16. If we have time, we'll get to number 17. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share your translation. You would like to read the translation. All right, well, let's start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
One moment. So this is the Wayne Dyer translation. Become totally empty. Let your heart be at peace. Amidst the rush of worldly comings and goings, observe how endings become beginnings. Things flourish, each by each, only to return to the source, to what is and what is to be. To return to the root is to find peace. To find peace is to fulfill one's destiny. To fulfill one's destiny is to be constant. To know the constant is called insight. Not knowing this cycle leads to eternal disaster. Knowing the constant gives perspective. This perspective is impartial. Impartiality is the highest nobility. The highest nobility is divine. Being divine, you will be at one with the Tao. Being at one with the Tao is eternal. This way is everlasting, not endangered by physical death.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be David, Judith, and Brian. David.
Okay, this is the Hermann translation. Seek to attain to absolute emptiness. Maintain a state of perfect stillness. See how all things come into being and see how they return. They come to flower in fullness and then go back to the roots whence they came. To go home to the root is to achieve perfect stillness. Thus, in attaining stillness, do they fulfill their destiny. And thus, in turning back, they join the never-changing. To be aware of the never-changing is to be enlightened. Not to know the never-changing is to stumble blindly into miseries. He who knows the never-changing embraces all. Embracing all, shall he not accept all impartially? To be impartial is an attribute of kingship, and kingship is of heaven. He who is of heaven can attain the Tao. He who is of the Tao endures forever. And though his body decays, he never dies.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, David. Next up is Judith, Brian, Michael, and Greg. Judith.
This is the Stephen Mitchell translation. Empty your mind of all thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Immersed in the wonder of the Tao, you can deal with whatever life brings you. And when death comes, you are ready.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judith. That was great. Next up is Brian, Michael, Greg, and Evanique. Brian.
Okay, this is again from the translation by Yasuhiko Denku Kimura. Attain utmost emptiness, maintain utter stillness. Then, as 10,000 things rise together, one will witness their returning to the source. Though things abound in the universe, they all return to the source. Returning to the source is called stillness, and stillness is called returning to destiny. To return to destiny is to return to eternity, and to know eternity is called enlightenment. To act unawarely of the nescience of eternity is to bring disaster to your life. To know eternity is to be all-inclusive. To be all-inclusive is to be impartial. To be impartial is to attain self-mastery. To attain self-mastery is to be heavenly. And to be heavenly is to be one with the Tao eternal. To be one with the Tao eternal is to enjoy everlasting life, forever secure, even after the enfolding of the physical self.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Michael, Greg, and Evanique. Michael. Michael, you need to unmute yourself.
Empty yourself of everything. Let the mind become still. The 10,000 things rise and fall while the self watches their return. They grow and flourish and then return to the source. Returning to the source is stillness, which is the way of nature. The way of nature is unchanging. Knowing constancy is insight. Not knowing constancy leads to disaster. Knowing constancy, the mind is open. With an open mind, you will be open-hearted. Being open-hearted, you will act royally. Being royal, you will attain the divine. Being divine, you will be at one with the Tao. Being at one with the Tao is eternal. And the body dies, the Tao will never pass away.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Next up is Greg.
This is Ursula Le Guin's translation. And she calls the chapter Returning to the Root. Be completely empty, be perfectly serene. The 10,000 things arise together. In their rising, in their return, now they flower, and flowering, sink homeward, returning to the root. Return to the root is peace. Peace to accept what must be, to know what endures. And that knowledge is wisdom. Without it, ruin, disorder. To know what endures is to be open-hearted, magnanimous, regal, blessed, following the Tao. The way that endures forever, the body comes to its ending, but there is nothing to fear. Now, on this chapter, she does have a commentary, which is, to those who will not admit morality without a deity to validate it, or spirituality of which man is not the measure, the firmness of Lao Tzu's morality and the sweetness of his spiritual counsel must seem incomprehensible or illegitimate to those very troubling indeed.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Next up is Evanique.
This is from the Tao of Christ. Chapter 16, embrace emptiness to the uttermost. Guard stillness steadfastly. All things are active and then return to rest. All things grow and then return to the root. Returning to the root is stillness. In stillness, they have fulfilled their destiny. We were born to follow this path. To realize this truth is wisdom. To be ignorant of it results in evil and discord. Knowing this way produces openness and tolerance. Openness and tolerance produce community. From community comes morality. From morality comes holiness. In holiness, one draws near to God. Drawing near to God brings long life on earth and eternal life in heaven.
Wonderful. Thank you, Avanik. I'm going to have Kevin read this in Mandarin, and then we're going to go to Brian and Madeleine. Kevin. Kevin, go ahead. I can't hear you. Okay, looks like there is an audio problem. Okay, Jason.
Then you go.
Oh, go ahead. That's better.
Right?
Go ahead.
Chapter 16, sorry, yeah, I
Yes.
switched my side. Okay. 次须疾，守静笃，万物并作，无以观夫。夫物芸芸，各夫归其根。归根曰静，静曰夫命，夫命日长，知常日明，不知常枉作凶。知常容，容乃公，公乃全，全乃天，天乃道，乃久，莫生不义。Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Next up is Brian, followed by Laura. Brian.
Okay. This is J.H. McDonald. If you can empty your mind of all thoughts, your heart will embrace the tranquility of peace. Watch the workings of all creation, but contemplate the return to the source. All creatures in the universe return to the point where they began. Returning to the source is tranquility because we submit to heaven's mandate. Returning to heaven's mandate is called being constant. Knowing the constant is called enlightenment. Not knowing the constant is the source of evil deeds because we have no roots. By knowing the constant, we can accept things as they are. By accepting things as they are, we become impartial. By being impartial, we become one with heaven. By being one with heaven, we become one with Tao. Being one with Tao, we are no longer concerned about losing our life because we know that Tao is constant and we are one with Tao.
Wonderful. Thank you, Penny. Next up is Laura. Laura, go ahead.
This is Lao Tzu translation, and it reads as follows. All things are in unison, thereby we see their return. All things flourish, and each return is to its source. Returning to the source is stillness, is returning to one state. Returning to one state is eternal. Knowledge of the eternal is realization. Not knowing of the eternal leads to unfortunate errors. Knowledge of the eternal is all embracing. To be all embracing leads to righteousness, which is majestic. To the majestic leads to the heavenly. To the heavenly leads to the way. The way is eternal. Until your last day, you are free from evil, peril. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
Okay.
Next up is Jason. Jason, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, again, that's the, I work on the translation, and then I think with Armand's help, and then I think get easier and easier, so I'm quite happy. And then, so I'm going to read first, okay. Attend to the utmost passivism. Hold to the truly quiet. All things have life, but I see them returning. Because they flourish, they then return to their roots. Returning to the roots is called quiet. It is fulfilling their destination. It is the unchanging law. I highlight it because I think this subject is about the unchanging law. Okay. Those who understand this unchanging law are enlightened. Those who don't understand this unchanging law act recklessly, causing disasters. Then Lao Tzu is going to give us 6 lessons. Okay, I like to pay attention on the 6th lesson is from self to public, from small to big, from tangible to intangible, from now to forever. So the sixth lesson is knowing unchanging law. One can deal with the appearance. Okay, that means your personal, affair. Knowing the appearance, one can deal with the public affairs. Knowing public affairs, one can deal with political affairs. Knowing political affairs, one can deal with heaven's affairs. Knowing heaven's affairs, one can know how to deal with the Tao. Knowing how to deal with the Tao, one can govern for eternity. Then that's the last lesson. Everybody have a different answer, and mine is very different. I will translate as, thus your governing never fail, even without your own involvement. So here, I think I have issue with most of the translator, including a lot of Chinese interpreter, because I think most of them get too much influence on Buddhism thinking. So usually talk about, like I heard the term, body decay, never die. When death comes, you are already enjoying everlasting life. That's all very Buddhism thinking. So I'm not saying that's wrong, but remember, this one is before, okay, Buddhism come to China. So they may have the same idea. So I try to avoid. That's why at the beginning, most of translators talk about the attain to the utmost emptiness. Okay, but here this word xu, okay, basic doesn't mean emptiness. That means passive. Okay, instead of doing things, they not doing things. So kind of like wu wei, no action. So that for this reason, I will translate, because they said mo shen, that means have no body. Second words like never die. Okay, how, and this sentence has been appeared not once, twice. I think on the chapter 52, they have the same sentence talk about without body but never die. So I just like previous my idea is when Lao Tzu talk about without body, he's talking about without your bodily involvement. So that means without your bodily involvement, so you are not doing daily work, your governing will still last forever. So basically, he is talking about wu wei, no action. So you don't have action, and that your governing will continue. Okay, so that match with this six, okay, lesson. Okay, and my translation is based on the facial value of these few words. I'm not extended. I based on the facial. So first word Rong means appearance. Okay, Gong means the public. Okay, Wang means the kingdom. Okay, Tian means heaven, and this one Dao means Dao, and the Jiu means last for a long time. So I'm not extension. I just based on the face value. So I talk about take care of your appearance, personal thing, public things, government thing, okay, kingdom thing, okay, heaven's thing, and the Tao and the forever. So from small to big, from now to forever. So that's the translation I make, and I believe it's different from all the translators. But just my opinion, and then you agree or disagree. I think the last sentence and Armand had a different translation. So I kind of think like, okay, I still want to insist using my own idea, because I believe nobody more shen bu dai, this sentence, because it's not being appeared only once, it's been 2 times. So I want to make sure the same sentence, we will have the same meaning on different chapter. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Let me ask Aman. Aman, what was your take? Well, firstly, I want to say that for those who you do not know, Dao De Jing is the second most translated work in history after Bible. So many people have taken, and there is a whole range of approach to translations. And what we're trying to do is that we're trying to bring, look at all of them together, and we're trying to kind of compare and trying to get at what is being said. So Amon, what is your take on the last line? Go ahead.
I actually was just messaging Jason that I really liked what he did with this final. We go back and forth on these, but I don't really get to see the final product more often than not until I'm here for the night, and I get to actually sort of see it firsthand. And it's always a delight to sort of see how that comes together. I don't disagree with Jason at all, though I do need to actually go back and look at what we were discussing. I translate that last sentence something to the effect of, thus your governing is undying and never fails. And it may be too loose a way of interpreting those four characters, you know, no body, no death. But I think it sort of hits at the same sentiment, though I do like, Jason, your translation. I do agree that it is a testimony or a what's the word I'm looking for here? It is a appeal to govern with Wu Wei, or to use Wu Wei as a means of action. So, and again, I will give full credit, Jason, you're doing the heavy lifting. I'm just throwing in my 2 cents.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amon. So what we're going to do next, folks, is we're going to go through and talk about what we got from this chapter. And I think the chapter naturally divides into 3 parts. So the first part, I'm going to read the first paragraph. So would like your comments, your thoughts about just the first paragraph first, and then we'll go to the second one, and then the third one. The first one is, this is Ursula Le Guin's translation. The title is Returning to the Root. Be completely empty, be perfectly serene. The 10,000 things arise together. In their arising is their return. Now they flower, and flowering sink homeward, returning to the root. So your thoughts about this concept of returning to the roots. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to talk about what you get from just this concept of returning to the root, what it means to you, what its significance is. We're going to start with Phil. Phil, go ahead.
I think I'm going to have a slight, well, first of all, I don't like the fact that you broke it into 3 parts, but nonetheless, I'll respond. I thought about this number 16 somewhat, and I got a different idea. I've always been troubled by this separation of the Tao and the knowing of the Tao, because it's unknowable. It occurred to me that what he's saying, I got that idea from the returning, kind of the eternal return, if you want to call it that way, that it happens simultaneously. That eternity in a cyclical movement happens simultaneously because it can only be known when it manifests itself into the world. And yet the manifestation itself does not give you an understanding except the flow of time. But you also understand in the sense how that returning cycle allows time to enter into eternity. And what that does is allows you to penetrate both simultaneously, not in a hierarchical term, because I'm thinking of the Tao itself and the manifestation is really a manifestation of harmony between the Tao itself and the manifestation. And that harmony is really, I didn't like the way he set up the hierarchy. The manifestation is not a matter of like higher steps, but really the temporal evolution of understanding from the lower to the higher. So in that sense, it could also exist in a sense of the unfolding of the eternity within the temporality, in a sense that this is how a plant or how the sun, earth move around each other, how culture itself produces this. I also thought a great deal about Chinese paintings because, you know, it's the poet that sits in a mountain and is contemplating the eternal while he's living in the temporal. So the contemplation is a harmony, but is also culture, in a sense, growing up and reaching into the eternal. So I think strangely enough, it is not something that's unreachable. It's something that happens simultaneously, rather than you do this and maybe eventually you might not get it, you get close. So I think it's a simultaneous occurrence that has to do with tuning yourself to the harmony that exists between the manifestation and the eternal that exists. This is what I think.
Wonderfully put. Thank you, Phil. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Laura. Joe, what do you get from this concept of returning to the root?
It's always difficult to follow Phil. It is because that was a really nice take on it. I mean, I look at it as that change is constant, and it's understanding change and understanding the cyclical nature of the world, and that everything is temporary. And I think it's kind of hard not to think, especially I'm looking at the Ursula Le Guin translation right now, the idea of death comes in to this picture, and understanding death. And once you have this understanding of death, you understand that it's part of nature. It's a constant that is part of nature. But as I've said in the past in other meetups, it's interesting because it's the thing that drives all change as well. And we can talk about that a little bit further as we get into the poem. But I think initially that it's just talking about the temporal nature of life, and the idea of change and time, and our understanding of that. For the first part of that. But there's more to it, obviously.
So folks, if you want to continue into the further parts, you're welcome to do that. Next up is going to be, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I definitely want to go on to the other parts, because it's also how we adapt to change as well. And I think that there's a lot once we understand that change is constant, and that that our lives are temporary, we can start to, I think it was Brian's translation that said something about stillness, and you can live with a certain degree of tranquility. And I liked the way it was put in my translation, where not knowing this cycle leads to eternal disaster. If you are unaware of this cycle, that or not willing to accept this cycle, that it leads to a certain amount of despair. And as opposed to accepting it and knowing that everything will pass at a certain point in time, that everything is even the hard times. And it reminded me of the idea of being like water, where you're able to flow with the change of time, and understanding how difficult times won't last forever, and will, it gives you an understanding of the state of nature, and that essentially that you won't live in despair. That's the way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Madeleine. Laura, what do you get from this concept of returning to the root?
I probably took a simpler form, looking at it as more like the cycle of life. You know, you're born, you mature, and you die, and you return to earth. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Next up is Madeleine.
Yes, thank you so much, Jason and Aman. This adds so much to what we're doing here. I noticed in Jason's translation that instead of the word source, which is what I have in the fourth line, at the end of the fourth line, he had destination. And when I first glanced at it, I thought, oh, he must mean destiny. And I thought, oh no, he means destination. This is really cool. I like returning to your destination. It kind of puts it all together in one neat little phrase. And I thought that my translation, I have the same one that Michael has. The 10,000 things, excuse me, rise and fall while the self watches their return. And I have a capitalized self here. I can't remember what the direct translation was, but to me it was somehow the big self of the universe, but also the quiet inner self, that small detached part that's there, observing kind of no matter what's going on. Through everything else, there's some little removed part that's observing everything. And that's the, not the analog, but the link to the larger one.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madeleine. Next up is going to be Michael, followed by Judith. Michael.
Hi, yeah. So, so to me, when I read it, I think of how what I take from it is this idea that things are in kind of in a lot of chaos. If you would look at the things at individual events as they're happening, you turn on the news or whatever, all kinds of crazy things are happening in the world. Sometimes good things happen, bad things happen. But regardless of what's happening, it's still being governed by a core nature, which is not changing. And so I think what you were saying just now about the self being detached and kind of observing that as, observing how regardless of what's happening, how it's still being governed by a core source. Or
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Next up is going to be Judith, followed by Brian. Judith.
My impression was very much what Madeleine and was it Michael just speaking, were saying. The word that came to mind for me was disengaged, which I think is very much like detached. So like a lot of times we are very engaged in what is happening, like either trying to act on things or feeling acted upon, or, like the universe is in control of us or we're in control of it. And so what I got was sometimes to step back, disengage from that sensation and just watch, because by doing that, you gain a kind of perspective where you are, where you want to go, things like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Next up is Brian.
I had some notes that, or a one note, and Phil really, I think, touched on it, and then Joe as well. Phil made the point, you cannot really know, at least as I understood him or as recall, cannot really know the Tao. But then following, and I think that's true. I think that's what this person is trying to say, or what this poem is trying to say. And you can only be, so the state of mind or the mental activity or action or attitude is not one of knowing, it's one of resignation, accepting or embracing the Tao. And that I thought was mentioned in different ways by Joe. So the shift in focus is away from knowing it to resignation or acceptance or even embracing. And how do you embrace something that you don't really know? I think that's also been picked up in some of the poems. It's through openness that has been touched on. Now I'd like to circle around to another question. Since we can't know these things, I'm wondering how we know there is eternity. That's a word that's used in some of the translations, but not in all of them. Eternity seems to mean, I don't know, time, something, the world, the cosmos going on forever. I just wonder, and I'd like Jason's comment on this. When you use that word kind of offhandedly, you put eternity in your translation, but when you talked about the Japanese character, you said a very long time. When you pointed at the character, you said a very long time. So I'm wondering if we're thinking if this word, the Chinese character, is really about some eternity that we know lasts forever, or some indefinite amount of time that we don't know how long it lasts.
Jason?
Okay, let me answer your question. Okay, yeah, I not make it clear, I'm sorry, but the word, by its face value, is long time, okay, not eternity. But I don't see Chinese have eternity, okay, ancient Chinese, they don't have, probably, I cannot say, probably somebody can help me. I just don't, at this moment, I cannot think about words for eternity. That's why, and I think the eternity, probably the eternity doesn't mean that words, okay. Remember, okay, let me show the screen for a minute, okay. Let me see, let me show the screen, okay, here, okay. Okay, this sentence, okay, if you talk about this one, the 6 advices, this one is not eternity. I put the eternity, I was put it for a long time, but in order to let it sounds better, and plus the Chinese meaning here probably means very long, okay, eternity. The real eternity is this one, okay? So the last advice, without your own involvement, that means never die, okay? By the face value means never die. So we can consider as eternity. So that's the dilemma, the question you have, Brian. Okay, so because it's by the face value, it's a very long time. Okay, so I hope I explained this one because the language limit. Okay, so that's the case. And I just like to use the chance to talk about my feeling or my lesson about this one. I think this one is talking about the a political advice. Okay, that's I always believe this one is a political advice, and we learn the moral lesson from this political advice. So Lao Tzu is telling us they have a constant, unchanging rule, okay, in this world. Okay, so when you deal with daily affairs, government issues, okay, they have an unchanging rule. You don't have to go to the nitty-gritty, all the small details. You just remember they have the unchanging rule. Understand the rule, follow the unchanging rule. Then you can relax. Even you are not involved here, you can have everything go. Okay, so that's he tried to tell us or tell the prince what to do, and we can use the lesson for our daily life, right? Everything if you have a kids, you driving around here. If you set up as a general rule, understand that's an unchanging rule, you can be more, relaxed. I think that's the lesson I learned from this. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Jason. Next up is Kevin.
Yeah, for this chapter, I would say 2 words about hollowness, about we use quiet and not quiet. Basically, keep our heart like we keep our mind open-minded, like a hollow. You can contain the new ideas and new things. And now is keep your heart quiet. You know, don't, if you try, even the second sentence is saying, you know, try to, let's see, some of the things, all eventually they come back. It's you can translate to returning, or it's like a cycle. Just come back to the origin. And the last one for me, I would say nobody, no danger. And by the way, one word is in Chinese is 长. I mentioned before, it's one is, it should be like eternity. However, that time they try, the one king called that name, they used already. So that word, they just change another word, which means common. And in the Jason translation, unchanging the law for that, yeah, it's basically rules. It's rules. One gentleman mentioned that doesn't matter how a human being play around, the nature got own law. They make, you know, put it correctly, our behavior, they got own rules to run. Thank you.
Wonderful. See, my take on the first paragraph, you know, I see this entire work as being highly visual. So I see it in terms of pictures. So I see this kind of, you know, going from the center out and coming back. And you do this enough number of times, it kind of becomes like a constant diagram. So you say, that's what the world is like. There is a center, and there are all kinds of manifestations of it, and they kind of fall back. And that entire motion gets kind of repeated motion gets concentrated into this kind of a diagram with the center. So, and I find that to be very useful of saying, you know, always keep your eye on the center, because is the origin of things, and that's the destination of things. And there are things that happen in the middle, and all of this is like visual, that is happening at the same time as, I agree with Phil of that it's kind of happening at the same time. And it's a question of perspective of what you're looking at. You can look at a particular part of it away from the center, and you can look at its movement, or you can look at the center, and it's kind of, it's a perspective. Next up is Phil.
Yeah, my interpretation is probably in many ways an attempt to reconcile the contrast between East and West, because this simultaneous recognition of both is not only something that not necessarily manifests in a hierarchy, but in repetition. And I think it is not something that slices time in a linear fashion, but as I said, harmony by fine-tuning the relationships so they become more and more in tune. And we would think of repetition in this sense as receiving a kind of greater depth in terms of understanding of the repetition, and therefore a greater harmony. But I think I also like my interpretation because it puts the emphasis on the arts, because you're not just standing by and being sort of like offstandish and out of the picture. There is a responsibility for you to interact and transfer your depth of understanding harmony to the world, not in a direct way, because that would be like the ruler who's always getting it wrong, but an indirect way, what I would call being oblique, that suggests to others to tune into the harmony rather than this is exactly how you get to the harmony, or this is exactly how you get to the destiny, because each person who tunes in must find the harmonies themselves. And so therefore, in their own experience, create this sort of simultaneous relationship between the eternal or the unattainable and the manifestation. of the unattainable. So that's as close as you get, but it puts a responsibility that we all have a chance, have a responsibility to create harmony and express it in some way into the universe, because it's the only way it actually manifests itself into the world.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. I want to bring in, I always like to compare these different meetups we are doing. We're doing a meetup on Louis Sullivan, who is my absolute favorite thinker of all times. We do this on Saturdays, and we are studying his autobiography. And he describes his life, the central theme of his life, as follows. As a child, he's saying, life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. A continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. So it is, you're taking in the life fully, you're accepting all that there is, and then you're breaking out, you're expressing what you see as its nature as best as you can, or you're acting according to the Tao. So it's an active thing, and this continuous cycle is what he's talking about when he describes life. Now I'm going to open it up for the entire, so the entire poem. You can talk about part 1, 2, 3, all their connections. You can talk about any aspects as a whole. What do you think of number 16? What did you get from it? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share. We'll start with Brian.
I wanted to follow up on a comment that Jason made, that this is a political device. I note that most of the people are commenting on personal perspectives, artistic, moral, and the rest. There is a possible political parallel that just struck me when you were talking, and that was the colonial America, the English colonies, and the creation of the United States. The idea there was, and it was an idea that was embraced in France in particular, was to let things happen naturally, to let things follow their natural course, to pursue natural law, and not to have the government direct or impose what should be happening. And in fact, governments were doing that with their mercantile policies, importing and exporting, all that was controlled. And through the feudal system, what was produced was also controlled. And so a school of thought came out that was expressed by Adam Smith. And Adam Smith captured these ideas. He wrote his book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, the date of the American Declaration of Independence. And with some simplification, the sum and substance is that if we let the economy follow its natural course without the intervention of governments, in other words, with free markets, then we will, nations will achieve their greatest wealth. And that idea was considered was an exciting idea in Europe, because it was thought that in North American colonies, there was no history, there was no culture, there was nothing had been imposed. It was a purely natural state. And it was very exciting for them to see what would evolve. Another example of that is the way Benjamin Franklin was received in France when he went there, and also Thomas Jefferson. They were both perceived as embodiments of the natural man. Coins were struck of Benjamin Franklin as the natural man, wearing a raccoon skin and a raccoon hat. It was the French were very much into that. But that's just a parallel that I think at least helped me make sense of what Jason was talking about.
Thank you, Brian. Folks, yes, Jason, go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. I still think, okay, all the chapter is talking about the political advice, because I have no reason to believe the Lao Tzu, okay, and as a historian, okay, he's a historian, his job is a historian, okay. So for the government, has interest to talk to the regular people, okay, what to do. He is talking about the government, just like all the philosophers in that time. So I'd like to just respond to what Brian talked about the idea of political. So if we reflect to what the Western philosopher thinking, I think the person will be Henry Thoreau, right? His book about the, what's the name? The Warden Pond in the winter, okay? Basic idea is the lesser government. The lesser governing is the better government, right? So that's the idea. So very similar, this kind of idea. But I'm not saying anything wrong on the interpreter, because when you read the political advice, you can think about your daily affair. You can think about, take as a moral lesson. I also take the same view as when you read Confucius Analect, because Confucius is telling his disciple, okay, how to govern, okay. They are all princes, they are government officers, right? They tell them how to do it, use your moral, okay. So of course, we can take this one as the moral lesson, but I believe during that time, all the philosophers are interested in the political advice. That's why I'm taking this position on the political advice.
Thank you. I would also like to add, if you want to look at the parallels in the West, you have, I mean, throughout the West, up until, you know, the Magna Carta or the founding fathers or John Locke, when you look at the times before that, most thinkers in the West regarded a benevolent monarch as the political ideal. So the idea that it is, you know, political structure flows top down. The dramatic difference is the American way of looking at things. We're saying that each individual has rights and governments are instituted to protect the rights. So it's like bottom up kind of a movement. Very good. Next up is going to be Madeleine. Madeleine, go ahead. What did you get from number 16?
Let's see. Well, Brian mentioned Benjamin Franklin. And if I knew nothing else about Benjamin Franklin, he wrote a famous little book about the importance of setting up a daily schedule for oneself and exactly how to do it and exactly how to track your time, and it became a thing. He publicized it. The thing was that in his own personal journals, he lamented the fact that he himself was unable to do it for even a single day. And if I knew nothing else about him, I would love him for that.
Thank you.
And this is actually relates to the sort of the discussion near the end of the poem about not imposing things from without, from starting from a more passive role and a more wu-wei approach, rather than this external rigid structure that you may never be able to live up to. And that would be political as well in relation to the whole Adam Smith thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Madeleine. So folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have any general comments about that. Aman, what do you think of this poem as a whole?
I've been absorbing the conversation thus far, and it reminds me of why this one in particular has always been challenging. I've read a few different translations of it, and honestly, I think I told Jason when we corresponded over this, I found this translation in particular to be the most cogent, where I could actually follow what was coming from it. But then listening to everyone, I think that maybe I got a little too grounded and lost some of the broader or more esoteric possible concepts. There is something about the returning to the root and the idea of loss of self. These strike me as ashes to ashes sort of sentiments, that death really is at its roots what everyone will return to. And so all the advice of governing in between, realizing your death and actually coming to meet your death, has to deal with not being fixated on the outcome, but really pay attention to process. Know how you comport yourself day in, day out, and that you are working in a manner that is to know the way. If you're doing this, you'll be a greater sage king. But it almost reminds me more of Marcus Aurelius, as long as we're going to be throwing out figures here, of the meditations to be reminded every day that you will die. And that can free you to do great things. And I really did sort of pick that out when I was reading Jason's translation, but it sort of got more rounded out as I was listening to the conversation here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amon. Next up is David, Joe, and Phil. David.
Yes, thanks. I had a question because of the Chinese presentations again. I mean, great by Jason and Kevin. Amon, do we know what dialect was actually used originally or would be appropriate for the time period that this was written? And does that make a difference? I mean, it will make a difference in the sound, but in the way that the poetry actually comes across in the words.
In a word, no. Chinese is
I can answer this question if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the southern accent, southern language. Okay. And right, let me share the screen, and then let me tell you what I meant. Okay. Here, if you go to the previous last week section. Okay. If you look at the Chinese. Okay. This one is very southern accent, very southern language, which is different than the northern, which is Confucius talking about. So you see, they have the 7 lessons. I'm talking about chapter 15. You see the words, these words, xi. Okay, these words has no meaning. Okay, and then this words is from south. Okay, when I say south, I explained before. That's the south, still north of Shanghai. Okay, that's the dialect. Okay, the language used in the south part. Okay, so that's the different language. And I'm from Taiwan, and our Taiwanese language still keep some of these sounds. When we say something, we say a. Okay, that's the sound. Okay, from that. So they have some trace about the language. You know. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, the real key with the Chinese language is not so much in the spoken. It is a written language, and the consistency of the writing over millennia is what has made communication possible across Chinese dialects throughout China, Taiwan, and the diaspora in other countries. So it almost matters less how exactly it was spoken, but that there is some sort of meter or rhythm consistency in the speaking is going to come through no matter the dialect.
No, thanks, Amon. But I mean, I guess just to clarify this a little bit, what I meant is the tonality. I mean, of these different dialects, and because Srikant's done this great job of saying, hear this in the original Chinese, and so I was just wondering if the actual tonality of the South versus North versus how you're using these different accents, comes across or has any impact on the. I mean, I understand the rhythm, I understand the writing. But I'm just thinking of how it sounds. Would that matter if we were hearing this in not just in the Southern dialect, but in an archaic Southern dialect?
Let me answer this question. Okay, so if you probably hear what Kevin read, Kevin is from the north. I believe, I don't know where are you from. Okay, but he's more northern sound. I'm the southern sound. So even we read Chinese, it sounds very different. Okay.
Can we have a reading, both of you separately, so we can hear it?
this is very different, and I'm famous for have a strong Taiwanese tone on that. So,
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it, Jason.
I also like to make a point on this one. My great grandpa, okay, on my mother's side is a great point. Okay, he write point. Okay, Chinese, but he doesn't speak Mandarin at all. He only speak Japanese and my local dialect. So I just it's not commutable. If you speak my local dialect with people speak Mandarin, it's no way to commit to understand each other. But the writing are the same. When you write the literature or the point, it's follow the rule. Okay, same rule. Okay, so that's the language situation. So different than Western, especially in Indian probably more on the oral tradition, and Chinese is totally not in the oral tradition. So people around this, you can see sometimes you think about it's strange, right? For the big land, and how people can communicate, they use writing. Okay, they use writing. So the writing are the same, but when you talk, it has a problem. So that's the situation.
Oh, this is really fascinating, Jason. Can you give an illustration? Maybe just read like maybe first 4 lines. You read it and then Kevin read, and I want to see the difference, what it sounds like.
Okay, let me read the first 4 lines. Kevin is still there?
Yes, I'm listening to you guys. Yeah.
Okay, so let's read the first one.
Whatever you read, I read again.
自虚极守 Okay, 自虚极 Okay, let's do this way. Okay, 自虚极守静笃 Kevin, your turn.
自虚极守静笃
万物并作，无以观复。
万物并作，无以观复。
归根曰静，是谓复命。复命曰长。
Oh, maybe a bit different. 夫物庸庸，各夫归其根。归根曰静。
Sorry. I miss one line. 夫物芸芸，各复归其根。
夫物庸庸，各夫归其根。
归根曰静，是谓复命。复命曰长。
归根日进，是谓复命。复命日长。
I think that word is 曰 not 日 right, Kevin?
Oh, 曰长 you're right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's 曰 not 日 Yeah, okay. 知常曰明，不知常妄作凶。
知常曰明，不知常妄作凶。
Okay, then we have the 6th lesson. 知常容，容乃公，公乃王，王乃天，天乃道，道乃久。
知常容，容乃公，公乃王，王乃天，天乃道，道乃久。
莫生不殆。
莫生不殆。
Okay, we're done.
Wow.
Is that different? Is that very different or?
I mean, I will have everybody comment on it. Let's start with Aman. Aman, what do you think?
I think if we had a Cantonese speaker, it'd be even more vastly diverse.
Yeah.
But yeah, the interesting thing with language, this is true of just language in general, is that language, as much as a literary phenomena, it is a political phenomena. Chinese is a language because Chinese people say it is a language. But if you were to see the disparity between one dialect and another from an objective standpoint, you might call these separate languages. Conversely, Norwegian, Swedish, Icelandic, Danish are quote unquote different languages. You can pick up a dictionary for each one, but they're the same exact language. If you actually listen to speakers from these countries, they can understand one another almost perfectly. Their languages are closer and less dialectically diverse than the dialect diversion within China. So there is also a political measure to why we would call these things a language, as opposed to a language family. But that written language is the sort of bedrock that they all share. It cannot be emphasized enough how important it is to a sense of Chinese identity coherency.
Okay, Aman, I have to ask you this because I know I've heard about this, I've known about this, but I'm just fully trying to grasp what this means. That you have two languages where when people talk to each other, they don't understand each other. But when they write, they understand each other perfectly.
You actually can see this in action in China when two people from different regions speaking different dialects cannot communicate or understand each other orally. They'll hold their hand out and scratch in the air a pantomime of the word they're trying to communicate. And you'll see it actually, and I experienced this myself in Shanghai because the Wu dialect is just different enough that asking for more ice at a Starbucks throws a barista into fits where they can't understand. Bing, shama bin, shama bin, ice. Oh, bean. No, I'm saying it right. You're saying it wrong. It really is that subtle sometimes.
Wow. So what you're saying is that the character is the same, but the way it is pronounced is different?
And that pronunciation difference, can make a world of difference.
Got it.
I think it's very complicated. In the northern part, okay, so you can think about it if you know geographic, right? In northern part, it's more land, right? So probably is more communicable, okay? But in the southern part, okay, there's another hill, okay? So like Guangdong, okay, the southern, a lot of hills. So usually our joke is if you pass another village, they don't understand each other. Okay, so even the dialect is so different. Okay, and then, but if you get to the writing, all write in the same way. Okay, so slightly different, but use the same word. Okay.
Okay, Jason.
I don't understand Chinese as well as you guys do because it's past me. But don't you have to explain tonality? How let's say the Mandarins have 4 and Cantonese have 9 or something. I mean, like that has to be. So Cantonese by its very nature is more sing-songy, more like a song, and Mandarin is less like a song. It's much more. Yeah. So that makes a difference. So if you hear somebody speak to you and then you heard somebody sing to you, they sound completely different.
I think you are very right. In the Western, I think only Chinese and the Vietnamese have tone, okay? And the Chinese different dialect have a different tone. Like you said, the Cantonese have a 9 tone, Taiwanese have a 7 tone, and the Mandarin have a 4 or 5 tones. Okay, so they all different. And
not only the tone, but because when you transition from one tone to another, you have to kind of glide through one to the other. So the gliding also makes the, how to say, a melodic transition. So there's that involved as well. So it's not only 9.
It's very different and it sounds complicated, but all kids, when I was young and I speak multiple dialect, and I just figure out, nobody teach me, but just figure out. So it's not that difficult.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, just now follow up the dialect. Used to be, not these days. Used to be village by village, cross 2 miles, 3 miles, speak local language. Then each other can understand each other, but they can identify, okay, this is from this village, this is from another village. So that's one aspect. A second is royal family, they got own language. This language, I use my name, like Sri Lanka, nobody can use anymore. That's so that's why some word that you only for loyal. Third one is government language, like official language, different ordinary people talking. They less politics, and we already mentioned that 4 tone in Mandarin in China, Madeleine, and in Taiwan, they got 5, Cantonese 8 or 9. Then one example for Western, for example, we call the meat of hen is a chicken. Meat of cow is beef. And meat of the pig is pork. Where's that come from? That's during the old days. French people, they called those names. It's from French. Then English people, that British people, they raise those cows, so they call cow. Okay, meat for somebody else, not for me. So very interesting. So allow those words of evolution is so yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Aman. Aman, go ahead.
Oh, I'm enjoying this because the linguistics of it just fascinate me no end. There are tropes that exist with different dialects, and Kevin's right. It's not as prolific as a zip code by zip code change as it probably was, a few hundred or even 1,000 years ago. This was Qin Huangdi's project in standardizing so much of China, including the written language.
When was this? When was this project? Because I mean, I'm looking at it as a political. This is like a tremendous political, innovation, a tremendous political tool of saying.
Qin Huangdi was right around the 2nd century BC. I could have to look up the date, but it's the mark of the end of the Warring States, and it's the first emperor of a unified quote unquote China. The same emperor who built the terracotta warrior army that is so famous.
Yeah, Qin dynasty. Qin dynasty.
Yeah.
We talk about Qin dynasty, 221 BC, 221 BCE.
Yeah.
And that's when we got the common script.
Yeah, okay, because the script is a little bit different during the warring state, but after that they try to unite together.
Yeah, it was standardized.
Yeah, standardized. Yeah.
The language, the coinage, the weights, the axle widths of carts, everything was standardized under Qin Huangdi, one of the shortest dynasties, but the one that probably had one of the most lasting impact on a unified China.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. This was just fascinating digression, and it's crucial to what we are studying here. So I'm glad we did it. But Joe has been very patient. Joe, go ahead.
I almost don't want to, take us back. I mean, my thoughts were so far, ago. And they're really not completely relevant. I mean, the way the conversation was going. Okay. So,
that's fine. That's fine. Let's do one thing. Then you are the only person. So if you okay, wait.
I'll pass, I'll pass, and then we can go back to the dialect.
We can go to number 17.
Okay.
We have enough time to go through number 17. All right, folks. So let's go to number 17. Who would like to read? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to read. And Jason, Kevin, Phil, and Aman, thank you very much for this. This was just great. So we're going to start the reading of number 17 with Joe, followed by David. Joe, go ahead.
Sure. With the greatest leader above them, people barely know one exists. Next comes one with whom they love and praise. Next comes one whom they fear. Next comes one whom they despise and defy. When a leader trusts no one trusts him. The great leader speaks little. He never speaks carelessly. He works without self-interest and leaves no trace. When all is finished, the people say, "We did it ourselves."
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is David. David, go ahead.
Sir, the greatest of kings rules, and his subjects are hardly aware of his existence. The less great is loved and praised by his subjects. The still less great is feared by his subjects. The still less great is despised by his subjects. For truly, where faith is not given, confidence is not inspired. How guarded and how sparing is the greatest of kings in giving utterance to his precious words. When his task is accomplished and all his undertakings crowned with success, The people, scarcely aware that they are ruled at all, say, all this happens according to nature.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Next up is Madeleine. Folks, if you would like to read the translation, your favorite translation, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Madeleine, go ahead.
Yes, my translation is by Jiafu Feng in Jane English. The very highest is barely known by men. Then comes that which they know and love. Then that which is feared. Then that which is despised. He who does not trust enough will not be trusted. When actions are performed without unnecessary speech, people say, "We did it."
Thank you, Madeleine. I'm going to read Ursula Le Guin's translation. She calls it acting simply. True leaders are hardly known to their followers. Next after them are the leaders the people know and admire. After them, those they fear. After them, those they despise. To give no trust is to get no trust. When the work's done right, with no fuss or boasting, ordinary people say, "Oh, we did it." She has a paragraph of commentary on this. This invisible leader who gets things done in such a way that people think they did it all themselves isn't one who manipulates others from behind the scenes. Just the opposite. Again, it's the matter of doing without doing, uncompetitive, unworried, trustful accomplishment, power that is not force. An example or analogy might be a very good teacher or a truest voice in a group of singers. Next up is Brian.
Start.
Okay. This is Stephen Mitchell. When the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. Next best is a leader who is loved. Next one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. The master doesn't talk, he acts. When his work is done, the people say, "Amazing, we did it all by ourselves."
Thank you, Penny. Next up is Brian Allenby. Brian.
Again, this is from Yasuhiko Rinku Kimura. The supreme leader is one whose existence is barely known. Next best is one who is loved and praised. Next is one who is feared. The last is one who is contemned. No trust will ever be accorded to a leader who lacks integrity. Therefore, with deep commitment, honor your words and trust the words of others. Then, when the work is done and success achieved, the people will say, "We did it ourselves."
Thank you, Brian. Next up is Jason. Jason, go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen. This one, I believe everybody get it correct. Well, I should not say correct. Basically, it's pretty easy to translate, I think. And then again, two things, I just be a little bit picky. I think this one, again, it's a political lesson. So my translation is, the best ruler is one whose presence is unknown. This one is talking about Taoist sage king. Okay. Second, okay, the second best is one who is beloved and praised. This one is a Confucian sage king. Okay. The next is the one who is feared. I believe this one is, so how to call it? Hegemony. Okay. And the next, which is the worst, is the one who is despised. So let's talk about tyranny. So that's a full level of leadership or ruler. If the ruler does not have enough confidence, the people will not have confidence in him. Okay, this one, I don't believe like most of translators talk about this word xin means Confucius xin. Confucius xin means trust, keep your word. And I believe here is talk about the confidence, because the ruler should have the self-confidence, and then people will have confidence on you. That's just my opinion, because I don't see this one can be, because if you put everything in logic, right? Why Lao Tzu talking about trustworthy? You know, he should be talking about trust yourself, confident. That's my opinion. The ruler should relax and spare his word. All right. So again, that's Wu Wei, no action. Don't do too much. So the last sentence: whenever a job is successfully completed, the people will say, "We have the job done by itself." Okay. So I just a little bit picky on this one. This word 我自然, that means I self yes. Okay. So some translation will call it 自然 as nature, which is the correct translation, but I don't believe during that time the 自然, the nature probably means happen by itself, doesn't mean the mother nature. Okay. So that's why I like to just a little bit picky. I just like the people will say, because that's reflect, you know, the I think which chapter they talk about the leadership stay behind to leader. So the people being led has no idea. Okay, this they have the leader over there. They just think, oh, the thing happened by itself. Okay, so again, this one proof okay my idea of every is about political leader. I don't think there's any way to non-political interpretation, okay, of this chapter. Okay, that's my translation. I think this one is very straightforward. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Aman. Aman, go ahead.
I agree. It is straightforward. It's just it's amazing how easily misconstrued this is. Just to sort of dovetail back to what we were discussing a moment before, this idea of the unseen ruler. The ruler should be removed and mysterious. This was what Qin Shi Huangdi actually attempted to do with the Qin dynasty and the establishment of government, and making himself a figure so far removed as to be remote and unknown. There's a lot of occasion where, especially in Chinese philosophical circles, Hanfeizi and legalists get, derided as being Buddhists, the bad guys. But this chapter was where that inspiration came from. The idea that let us establish a government of rules that everyone knows, that are applicable to everyone. You will not have to do anything hands-on. You can be the Taoist sage leader. You can be withdrawn and mysterious and just have your presence. And we'll conscript, half the population regularly to build walls and moats and, terracotta soldiers. And yeah, they may despise you a little. They may fear you a little, but mostly you'll be mysterious and at a remove. And so, although the chapter is giving very straightforward advice, how it is actually been taken on board and put into action has varied widely, and sometimes seems way far afield of what Lao Tzu was actually aiming for with the advice in this chapter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aman. So folks, it's time, this is a time to give your general take on this entire chapter. So it's going to be Jason, followed by Elena. Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Aman. I think Aman's it's very difficult on this situation. Okay, it's a political, and this one is very, just like Aman said, it's very straightforward, and you can take two ways, right? You can think about like, okay, I'm be nice to people, don't bother people too much, and then that's so-called Wu Wei, no action. But just like Aman said, Okay, and the Saturday, the Chinese philosophy, Asian philosophy this week, we are going to talk about the Han Fei. That's exactly the match on this one. You can take the legalism, okay, just like Qin Shi Huang, that's been known as a tyrant. He can take total, and actually he got advice from Han Fei, okay, to do this the way, become an invisible leader. Okay, in this one, you can take in this value. Okay, it's an invisible way. So I'm hiding behind. I enjoy my life. People don't know. Nobody know where I am, what my intention. You have no clue. I just have the government, the governor to take care of everything. Send the people to build the Great Wall, create the terracotta, do all kind of work. Okay, but I just invisible. So it's also matched on the previous section. Okay, you just keep this way, and even you are not involved, your government is continuing. So same lesson, okay, but you can take the totally opposite way to do it. Okay.
Thank you, Jason. Next up is Elena, Evanique, Brian, Joe, and Phil. Elena.
Yes, and thank you. This is actually incredible discovery for me in a way. So it's gonna what I see here is that to be the most effective leader, or to create in this life whatever you want to create, very often we put too much thoughts, attention, action, energy, and force into achieving the goal or whatever else, whatever people want to get in life materially, or whatever goals people have. So in this particular chapter, this particular part of the poem says that there is a way, and that way is give a direction, set a sail, and remove yourself. Let the sail, let the forces of the nature, powers that are there, they're hidden and they're constant and they exist. Let them move you to where you want to go. Give up. But when someone says, give up, like don't do this, just surrender. It's in a way, in Christian world, it's surrendering. So I'm just combining East and West here. So that's what was the revelation to me. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elena. Next up is going to be Evanique, Brian, Joe, and Phil. Evanique.
Yeah, one of the things I got from this particular poem was empowerment, and that the sense that great leaders empower others. And it was from the last line where it says the people people think that they did it themselves, or the people do it themselves, say to themselves, we did this, or I did this. And I think that's the hallmark of a good leader, is that it empowers people. And so I thought that was very telling. And I thought also, I felt like this was so familiar. And then I just scanned really quick, and chapter 3 of the Tao says, if you give leaders power, people become powerless. And those two lines were like, wow. And it goes on, and the whole thing, it goes on about material, if you value material things of that nature. But I thought those first two lines were like, when leaders try to have all the power to themselves, the people kind of feel defeated. They feel like that they can't do anything. And I thought about that. And I was like, yeah, so that's more going towards leaders being good leaders, being leaders that empower people to have them think they did it themselves. And when they speak about the quiet nature of a good leader, and when he talks about the different types of leader, the thing that came to mind in my world was our previous administration and our current administration. One person liked to be out there and like to talk a lot, and this particular person that's in now likes to take a step back and really not talk as much. And I just thought of the contrast of the two in context of this poem, and you can see the differences. and you can see how they both relate. So I just wanted to add that part. And then
Thank you.
that's it.
Thank you, Elena and Evanique. I think, I mean, one of the, I don't know which poem it was, but the basic idea here, I think, Lao Tzu's idea is for leader to act according to the nature of the people. So it's kind of you're following the nature of the people, and your ruling is based on the nature of the people. So you don't have to push them. You just, let them do what their true nature is. And you kind of work with that. If you're working with the nature of the people, then you don't need to do much. You just need to kind of step out and let them do that. So that's an excellent comment. Next up is going to be Brian, Joe, Kevin, and Phil. Brian.
So I appreciate the comments that Jason and Aman made about how this played out in China. When I read this, the thing that struck me is that poem 17 is suggesting the leader should or could be more process oriented and not outcome oriented. The only outcome that that is pointed to in this poem 17 that is presented as desirable is to be a supreme leader. There's no other policy decision in there, like building bridges or balancing the budget. There's nothing like that. It's just to be the best leader is to be those the people hardly know. So your goal is to be a leader. The only outcome is to be a leader that nobody knows. And the rest is process. And the process is the one where you let, just as Shrikant said, you let the people do things. And at the end, yeah, they will have done it all themselves. And that's the key thing. That's the process, not necessarily what they did, not the outcome. So that's all I've got.
Excellent point. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Joe, Phil, and Kevin. Joe.
Yeah, so I like this poem a lot as well. But one of the things that struck out, that I don't want to, just regurgitate what everybody else has been saying. They've been saying some great things. One of the things that stuck out to me was that when a leader trusts no one trusts him, and the importance of trusting the people around you and trusting yourself as well, and how that can actually be, without that fundamental, everything else breaks down. The other thing that I think is really important out of this is that this is telling you what a great leader is, but the opposite is actually what a great leader is not. So somebody that's dictatorial, that is essentially imposing their will on the people and taking credit, or and actually seeking their own praise, as opposed to letting everybody else have their just due. And that essentially you're constantly putting yourself as the only solution to the problem. These are the signs of something that are really, so this highlights everything that is the opposite of that. And I think it's important to really understand that part about it as much as it is to understand the importance of the poem itself. The other thing is that everybody else feels personally responsible. There's a sense of accountability without any force, and that's a very, very powerful thing to be able to create an environment where people feel like they're responsible, but there's nothing that has to be enforced behind them. And because that's really what a community is really like. So anyway.
Well, thank you, Joe. Next up is Aman, followed by Phil. Aman.
Oh, I did not want to hop the line. I appreciate what everyone was saying. And Joe, I definitely think there is a lesson in negative here that was often ignored. I just wanted to point out a distinction that's made that suffers from a little presentism on our part. We talk about Confucians and Taoist and legalist, and these distinctions didn't exist when this was written. They didn't come about for centuries. It was actually Sima Tian who invented the idea of Taoism and legalism and Confucianism. They would have all called themselves Rujia, just follower scholars. And that still would be what we would term a Confucian today. The people of scholars, you could probably think of them in the English vernacular as men of letters. And so these advices and how they were taken on board didn't come wholesale as this is everything there is to know or to understand or to think up from this school or in this way. And so it was a little bit of piecing from here and there that came together. So although the first emperor, is maligned as a legalist, and people can say, well, there were Confucian ideas there and there were some Taoist inspirations as well. Those distinctions really were sort of tacked on after. At the time, this was one way somebody decided to try and act out this chapter, and you could say for better or for worse, but for the unity of an entire civilization that's lasted for thousands of years now. So you can't argue with Lao Tzu's effectiveness, at least.
Thank you, Amon. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by Jason, Kevin, Katie, and Elena. Phil.
I think Taoism has two problems. One is how to continually access the Tao. And then the other one is how you manifest that in power. If emptiness is the essential quality, that means it must be open to the manifestations of the Tao in an ever-changing way. So the ideal way is to manifest that and then tune the population, you could say, to that understanding, so they are creating an openness for that. But unfortunately, in the manifestation of power, political power, and actually in some ways, if it's going to be a country, a military power, it is manifested quite often in a hard way, which means he already understands that power exists in the world. And how do you enter the world as a political source? And I think the greatest thing would be to, in a sense, to have this openness to the Tao. But this is unattainable in relationship to the manifestation of real power in the world. So in a world of warring states, as an example, a struggle to manifest objectivity, because we know how well the Dalai Lama is doing in relationship to communist China. I mean, the manifestation of that doesn't work. So, but the Taoists did enter in the government because the literati manifests its power in a second tier of advising, and therefore trying to attune the power that be to, in a sense, a degree of openness to the ever openness that's necessary. And I think there was many scholars that did that. And when the Mongols invaded and they ruled, most of the scholars, the literati, left the court because they knew that that was even that in terms of creating the second tier was impossible. So in that sense, they did manifest power. I was always interested in how the Chinese literati existed in the co-relationship between Confucianism and Taoism, because I think of them as like living in the weekdays in Confucianism that manifests a kind of power of law and structure. But in the weekends, I'm just putting that in quotes, I don't think they actually did it in the weekend, they would be Taoists that had a time to contemplate the possibilities of this openness. And so they enter in the world. So that was a duality they have to exist in the state that actually exists in the world. So that was only the first manifestation is difficult, the simultaneity. but you tripled that in relationship to how to manifest it in the real world, so that you could influence the emperor and the governing powers.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Next up is going to be Kevin, Katie, Jason, followed by Kevin, Katie, and Elena. Jason.
Two things I'd like to talk about. First is about like people want to talk about, most of translators talk about the emptiness. Okay, I just did the word search. There's no emptiness. Kong, this word in Dao De Jing. Okay, there's no this word. But another word I call the Xu, okay, has been appeared 5 times. So these 2 words, I think the Kong, emptiness, is Buddhism term. Okay, and the Taoism is talking about negation. Okay, another way called negate, passive. Okay, negation, not Indian sense of the shunyata, this kind of, I mean, that's later Buddhism term. So that's a little bit picky. I like to mention this one. And another is a more bigger issue, what Phil and Amma mentioned, how to read Dao De Jing. Okay, my understanding, as I interpret as a political advice. So if you look at this way, okay, Dao De Jing is talking about be efficient leader, okay, and the Confucians talking about be the moral leader. That's the difference. But they all have a purpose. If you talk about teleological, reason, a cause, right? The final cause. Confucius, through the moral leader, Confucius want to create the Confucian concern is the stability of the state, okay, through the moral lesson. And then what's Taoism try to do, especially Lao Tzu try to do? He talk about efficient leader and his purpose, not the efficiency of the state. The purpose, you can have the 2 interpretations. One is efficiency of the leader. That means myself as a leader, be very efficient to govern this country. That means I do the less work, I do the least work, and I enjoy my life. That's one purpose. Another purpose is talk about the efficiency for the state, make the state very efficient. That become the legalism. That's why the subtle difference, okay, between legalism, Taoism, and the Confucianism, okay, they all kind of mix together. But that's a little bit, that's a long discussion, but I just like to mention, they all connect together, but very subtle difference.
I just want to comment, when coming from the kind of Western context and the Indian context, I don't see Lao Tzu as a political person at all. I see political, he does politics kind of kicking and screaming because he has to, but I think like the thrust of all the poems that I see are metaphysical. It's basically between the Tao, understanding of the Tao, and what is involved in doing that. And in the course of doing that, I mean, that seems to be primary to me, primary thrust of the entire Dao De Jing for me. And in course of doing that, we are social beings. So then he gives advice on how do you deal with other people. And I, in the beginning, I did kind of an analysis of, I kind of categorized all the poems and say, okay, what are they? So I found that a bunch of poems are about Tao itself. There is a bunch of poems about the sage, of basically how do you follow the Tao. And then there are a bunch of poems on politics. And I think it's like the ratio that I saw as being kind of purely political, like 17 is purely political. But I think that's in a minority. So I see it as primarily being a work of metaphysics and about kind of existence, about soul, and about kind of what a sage is. And this being, a consequence, important consequence, but consequence, maybe 20%. So it's like 80-20 in wherever I see. Because even when in the structure of individual poems, I see like always the beginning is about talking about the Tao and how nature is and what is the way of nature. And it is an exhortation to say, act according to nature within yourself and act according to nature with other people. So my perspective is slightly different, but that's just a comment. Next up is Kevin, followed by Katie, Elena. Kevin.
We didn't read it in Chinese way, or okay. Anyway, skip time. I agree what you say actually just now. I would say our Dao is about more than let's say politics, more than a social science or and law. I used to be a youth member. I structure Dao as a mathematics and engineer. That's the pathway. The second layer is physics and chemistry. You can understand a lot from. The next, geology and biology. Then the fourth level with sociology, physics. Then you can, if you go to detail, see that kind of detail. For this chapter, I love it. It's simple. Anybody can read it, understand it, and it is about a question. I got a question. We last sentence. We did it by ourselves. We make it. Who is we? Is nature self? Is people? Is governor? Is government or politics or politician? That's question mark. And but it's very practical. Even from, let's see, from managing the one office or one team, you can see you are a leader. You want to your team member see you every day under listen word by lead by yourself, or let them do them own. That's from process. It used to be like you give me a task, I do it. Now go to self-contained team. It's called agile in IT. Lots. We figure out what's the best for the product. And we also use to be SOP, standard operation process. We talk about the flow. You see all those things come. Then also formal follows the function. Then the Dao here follows nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Katie. Katie, go ahead.
So yeah, with Kevin, I think we is the whoever is governed. My question towards to Jason was, why do they make, what's the difference between a tyrant and a dictator, and why do they make that distinction? It seems like, why wouldn't they use the same word?
Oh, the word is I just added for the explanation. Okay, I just what they in the original text it doesn't say that's the tyrant, that's the dictator. That's just my personal interpretation. Okay, sorry to mix up. Because it just say there's some leader. Nobody know the people don't know their existence. There's some leader people will praise. Okay, there are some leader people will follow. Okay, there are some leader people are afraid of. That's it. And I personally, I just add some. Okay, this one means Taoism leader. This one means Confucian leader, and this one is a dictator. Okay, hegemony, and this one is a tyrant. Yeah, that's my personal interpretation. So sorry to mix up.
I understand now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason and Katie. Next up is going to be Elena. Elena, go ahead.
Adding to what's been said already, it's very interesting. I want also to put a question out there.
Sure.
So there is very often, so the systems that are already existing of political systems, government, countries and such. So if we want to, they're stable relatively. And if we want to introduce something new concept, invent new political device and put it out there, we're shaking up the system. The system doesn't like it. And frequently what happens, there is a leader emerges who we would say like he's like a tyrant because of his saying all these things we're not accustomed to. And so basically, it's just what anyone would have to, whatever people would see and say about it, because of it's again getting this tyrant pioneer someone who would introduce new concepts to the society, very often it requires a serious instability for a period of time. So what does everyone think about it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If anybody wants to respond, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Meanwhile, we'll go to Phil. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, in some ways I disagree because there are just simply too many Taoists, or at least leaning partly through Taoism, in the government for them not to be interested in government. Now, you could say that maybe this is a cushy job. They're just lazy. They got time off, so they could contemplate the weekend. Or you could say, you know, something of that sort, that they're not capable of doing anything else except government work. But I don't believe that, because it seems to me all of them may not be interested in government, but they're interested, if you don't want to say being good people or virtuous people, okay, if you don't want to say that, they are at least all interested in being aesthetic people, because they're all too interested in the arts for me to say that they're not interested at least in the arts. So they're at least wise in terms of art. Now you could say that is a strategy to become a very aesthetic person that believes in art, the arts, and they enter into politics, and they're influenced, because if you have a lot of beautiful people, aesthetically pleasing people, you would, by your mere presence, transform the government. And by your influence of other people seeing you, you will influence the government. That's why they all left the Mongol court. I mean, it's like, because it would not allow that. It was too brutal of a rulership, too dictatorial. They left. So therefore, in a sense, you might not say that they enter it consciously, but they do understand the way you influence it is your presence produces a kind of, at least an attempt to aestheticize the government itself. And I think that's, I believe that's what happened.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I mean, this point about the dance between the Confucianism and Taoism within Chinese culture, government, I think it's a really fascinating question, because they're so different in some ways, so interacting in some ways. So it's a very interesting question. Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Shunkun. And you forget one more thing. It's a legalism. It's also hidden in the government. The Taoism, Confucianism, and legalism also hidden in this. Just kind of respond to what Theo talked about. He didn't believe in work, and the government just lazy. And actually, really happened. Okay, so-called the Neo-Taoism. Okay, it's happened about the 600s. CE, okay, they turn out the situation just like Theo said, that's become the ascetic, okay? So they just do nothing. And if you do something, being considered you are lame, you are stupid. So that's another thing called the Neo-Taoism. And then we can talk about this one later. That's another thing. And Elena talking about the change the system or this one, I just like to remind everybody during that time, the feudalism system is corrupting. So the whole society is changing. The different states, they used to be brothers, okay, but right now start to fight each other, annex each other. So all these philosophers try to resolve the issue. They are not bring a revolution. They try to resolve the current problem. Okay, so that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. I want to tell you about some meetups coming up. So next time we're going to look at number 18 and number 19, 1 week from now. I really like both of those, so it's going to be wonderful. Next, tomorrow, we have a very unusual meetup where everybody gets to bring their own topic, and you get to run your own breakout rooms on that topic. So it's like you're doing a mini meetup on any topic that you like. You just come, talk for 5 minutes on the topic, introduce the topic, raise one key question about the topic, and then you get an entire breakout room to yourself. You, of course, compete for attendees with other people doing the same. So it's going to be, you know, series of discussions on topics that people bring up. So don't miss that. Come with your own topic. So that's going to be tomorrow. On Thursday, we are looking at Bible. On Friday, we are doing a series on flow by Csikszentmihalyi. This Saturday, Jason is doing a meetup on Han Fei, right? The legalist philosophy. Very good. And then we will continue on Monday. We have a Nietzsche impersonator, and we're going to be talking about the concept of eternal recurrence, only once. So that's what we're going to do on Monday. All right. So thank you very much. Always amazing to see just this kind of chorus and symphony of views and thoughts. So really appreciate that. Special thanks to Jason and Amon for the work that they are doing, and for Kevin for reading out. I really love the duet between the two accents. We should get like 10 different accents from.
I will speak in Taiwanese next time. So.
Yeah, very good, very good. All right, so thank you very much, everybody. See you soon. Bye.